You can't even spell practice without PR. Public relations, PR for short, is one of the most cost-effective means of promoting a small business, including orthodontic practices. But it often goes unused, passed over for its more visible, more expensive counterparts, marketing and advertising. We'll talk about the opportunities you're probably missing and a lot more on today's show. Stay with us. Welcome to another episode of Ortho Thrive. I'm your host, Richie Gerzon. Our guest today is Barry Waldman. Barry is owner of Big Fly Communications. He is also an adjunct professor of communication at the College of Charleston and is a good friend of our team. Barry, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Richie. It's great to be with you.
So why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your education experiences?
Okay. I started my career as a journalist, working as the Capital correspondent for the Associated Press radio network in the state capital of New York, and worked in various radio and TV newsrooms, and also did a lot of writing, most of it freelance for daily newspapers and magazines. And in fact, I continue to do that. In the meantime, I switched into public relations and ran the communications department for a series of United Ways over 2 decades. I've also done crisis communications, and with my business the last 6 years, I've focused on strategic communications and content creation, and working with digital marketers like the Unimedia team to collaborate on full-body marketing campaigns. So I've done a little of everything.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Yeah, and so I think I can be of help. I've also, by the way, ghost written a book for an orthodontist, so I know a little bit about the orthodontic profession as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't know that many books are ghost written. That's a concept that I think the general public doesn't know about.
Several of them by me.
Yeah. So does Big Fly have a meaning? Why did you name the company Big Fly?
So I get asked that a fair amount, and people guess. I always ask people to guess. So go ahead, Richie, guess what Big Fly means.
You're really important, dude. I don't know what. Well, no, I have no idea. What?
So the 2 guesses I get most often are number 1, the salacious, and it's not. And number 2, fishing, and it's not.
That makes sense.
3 is the insect, but actually in baseball, a big fly is a home run. And so that's the derivation of my company name. I'm a baseball fan, and that means a home run. So I try.
Of course, that makes sense.
How about that?
All right. So I think a lot of people don't really know what public relations is. So if you were to define it for the layman, what would you say? And how does that relate to marketing and advertising?
Good question. I think if you were to go to the Public Relations Society of America and look at their definition of public relations, it would be some very obtuse 17-paragraph description. And when I say it would be, I mean, I have done that, and it was. But my definition, the definition I give my students, is that public relations is the part of marketing that requires the skills of journalism. So it's basically the part of marketing that is about writing and understanding how an audience interacts with words. And so you think about that, you're thinking about social media, and you're thinking about blogs and all the website content and all that. And that's why someone who was a journalist and has a graduate degree in journalism, like me, can slide easily into the world of public relations, and particularly in the digital era where so much of what we're doing involves interacting with words on the screen.
So what is the main reason you need PR? Is it just because there's so many words that are important when you're communicating? It's a main mechanism of communication.
Public relations is that PR people really understand, if they're any good, understand how you are interacting with your audience, and how your audience, more importantly, how your audience is interacting with you and the words you write. It's really rule number 1 of marketing is know your audience, of course, and put yourself in their shoes. So that's 101 is making sure that when you are communicating with people, however you do that, even in a podcast or in a video show like this, it's important to understand what your audience needs and wants and whether you're giving that to them.
I know, absolutely. Starting with the audience or that buyer persona, we always tell everyone that's like the first step in their business when we're talking about marketing.
That's right, the buyer persona and then the buyer journey. Not only who are they, but what are they doing and how are they getting there and why would they be buying from you? That's all important. And that's
So,
important, by the way, whether you're selling gizmos or you have a medical practice.
yeah, no doubt. Oh, speaking of, it sounds like we're going to inbound marketing, the kings of inbound marketing, HubSpot. They say the three types of PR are owned, paid, and earned media. So can you just give us a few examples of each of those?
Sure. So in the Paleolithic era of marketing and public relations, that is when I started my career, we only had outbound marketing. That is taking your information and throwing it into the face of the audience, whether they wanted it or not. Now, inbound marketing is the reverse. It's people coming to you by search or through social media or however they are looking for you. Let's see, owned media means your own channels. In the old days, you didn't have very much of your own channels. You had no way to reach the audiences out there. You had to go through a conduit, and that was by and large the news media, or it was through advertising, which is paid media. So your owned channel is what you have, your website, your social media channels, YouTube, and all that. Your paid, of course, is advertising, and you can get onto all those channels that aren't yours, like you can rank higher via search by paying. You can rank higher in a social media search by paying. You can come up on someone's Facebook feed or Instagram feed by paying.
Yeah.
And then earned media is what we, for a long time, called media relations. That is dealing with news media and bloggers to get them to write stories about you. You earn that. You didn't buy it, and it isn't your own.
And that's probably what a lot of people assume, that just that piece is PR. So that's interesting to know that all of them are.
That's right.
So would you consider PR kind of a form of storytelling?
Well, really all of marketing, if it's done right, is storytelling. The best writing is always storytelling. And in fact, when I write my books, I am constantly saying to the authors I work with, so give me an example of that. Tell me a story about that. And then they tell me a story, and then I fill in all the rest because they haven't done great storytelling.
Oh, I got you. So you're good at storytelling. They kind of give you the Lego blocks to build the story.
I had better be, right?
Yeah.
By the way, storytelling does not necessarily mean, in a book it is, but it does not necessarily mean a long yarn. For example, here's a story, Richie. It's 3 words. She said yes.
Yeah.
Now you're supplying most of the story in your head, but nonetheless, you see the story that develops out of that, and you can think of a pretty compelling one, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So a story could be as little as 3 words, maybe 2, and as much as a book.
That's a good lesson. So what should you do first to prepare for a PR campaign, in your opinion?
Great. That's a great question, because I think most people who are not professionals in PR, who think about doing a PR campaign, they fire before they get ready and aim. It's ready, aim. And so the first thing you need to do is determine what your objective is. What is it you're trying to achieve? Because if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. So, they have this the thing called the BHAG, the big, hairy, audacious goal. That applies to your business, and that's to double the number of patients in your practice, right? But a PR campaign can't do that for you, certainly not quickly. So then you have the goal of your marketing campaign, and maybe that's to increase by 10 new customers next month, right? A PR campaign can't do that even. It's an element in your marketing campaign.
Yeah.
So you have to have a more specific objective for your PR campaign. What is it you want this news release, this social media plan for the month, this advertising you're going to do, what do you want that to accomplish? And none of that is directly going to increase the number of clients you've got, but it will increase, for example, the number of people visiting your website or clicking on your social media posts or whatever. And so you need a smart goal for your PR campaign. What are you trying to achieve? And then once you determine that, the next very important element, as we've already discussed, is determining who is your target audience.
Mm.
And that target audience has to be the people you're reaching out to, and also people who are going to be of value to you. For example, I'm just going to make a wild guess here. The typical customer of an orthodontic office is the mother of a kid who's 6 to 14, let's say, right? Which means a mom who's around 40, a little younger, let's say 30 to 45, something like that.
Yeah.
So it doesn't do you a whole lot of good, for example, to be on Snapchat, because moms 30 to 45 aren't by and large on Snapchat. It doesn't do you a whole lot of good to advertise in the newspaper, because newspapers skew much older than that and male. And so you're not getting moms who are 35. They're not by and large reading the newspaper. That doesn't
Yeah.
mean there are no moms reading the newspaper and
Mm-hmm.
no moms on Snapchat, just that's not where you're going to find the bulk of your audience.
Yeah.
So,
Certainly don't put the majority of your budget into that, right?
so you need to determine your objective, and then find the target audience that's going to feed that objective.
Gotcha. All right. So if you have some of these elements, what's the next step to plan the actual campaign?
Already started you on that. Determine your media and methods to reach those people, right? So now that we've gotten a little beyond just the PR, we've gotten to the larger marketing funnel here. But if you know, and by the way, I call this the goal to success continuum. First, you determine what you're trying to achieve, then your target audience, and then from those, that's going to determine your media and your methods. The methods, as you brought up, Richie, are we going to spend money on paid media? Are we going to reach out and do media relations, try to get media? How are we going to use our owned channels? You're always going to use those. Frankly, you're always going to do everything, because that's the best marketing plan, right?
Yeah, that's always an interesting conversation with someone that doesn't realize that, because it's not, we should do everything. It's just a matter of where do we put most of our energy and budget, but
That's
you
right.
have to touch it if you want it to be holistic.
And not only that, a very important element of all this is it all has to be integrated. None of this happens on its own, and everything you do should be everywhere. So, for example, if you write a blog, you should link to that blog in your newsletter if you've got one. And if
Mm-hmm.
blog, you probably want to get people to it through your website. And you
Yeah.
probably want to post something on social media that connects to your blog. And you want to make sure your blog is connected to your SEO campaign, so that people who are putting in the right keywords get to the people who should be reading your blog and want to will find it, and so on. So all of this is connected, interconnected, and PR has to be part of that, whether you're doing media relations or social media or whatever.
Yeah, I'd say that's one of the advantages of working with a marketing firm that handles all of it, because you know it's happening. Because if you have 3 or 4 different people all over the country or even the world working on your marketing, it can be done, but you've got to wrangle the cats and get them to all play nice and make it happen.
Right, and frankly, just to blow your horn, Richie, that's how you're so very valuable to me, because you help put all the pieces together when I have a client and can bring them to you, and we put all those pieces together. Whereas I'm just the content creator and the PR guy, but it's always great to say I have a team working with me and we can make this all happen.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's so important to have those experts on your team so the quality is super high.
Yeah, and an orthodontic practice can have in-house people, and they can do a good job if they're good. And if you want to then raise your game, you really need to bring in experts who do this all the time and have the tools, and they already know which audiences are the ones you need to connect with Whereas an orthodontic practice is going, if they don't have all this, they need to find out who their audiences are, and then they need to find out where those audiences are and which media are the best to reach them. That's a lot of investigation and research that you already have in your head.
Yeah. And it's just so hard for one person to be that Renaissance person that is amazing at writing and awesome in technology and art and everything else. You really just, they're out there. They're just super, super rare and they're getting paid a lot. So
I wonder really if there's any single person out there. What you have are people who have teams. They have great teams.
yeah.
But even the most the biggest names in marketing right now, Neil Patel, for example, he doesn't do it alone. He doesn't write his own blog.
Oh, absolutely.
He's got a team, a great team, of course, but nobody is great at all of those. Nobody.
So would you say that PR drives marketing or does marketing drive PR?
No.
Yeah. Good answer. Yeah.
This is like saying, does the bride make the wedding or the groom or the father of the bride who's paying for it or the mother of the bride who's really coordinating most of it or the sister who organized the honeymoon and the bachelorette party or the best man who organized the bachelor party. No, you need all those elements to make it work. So PR doesn't really work without marketing. It's part of the marketing funnel, and marketing without PR has a big hole in it. It all works together.
Yeah, that makes sense, of course. So would you say some social media outlets are better, channels are better for PR than others? What would you say there?
Well, they work differently. Twitter is really a news medium. But keep in mind that the social media now, they all do the same things. Instagram was created as a photo site, but you can put photos on Facebook and do.
Yeah.
And now you have Facebook stories, just like you have Instagram stories. And Snapchat was supposed to disappear immediately. That was its value add when the disappearing disappeared.
Yeah.
Like 12 minutes after they went live.
Which always confused me. I was like, maybe it's just I'm too old for that, but it seems silly.
No, Snapchat is the first social medium that really added nothing to the
yeah.
social media. It really did. It really added nothing. The only thing Snapchat, the main value add of Snapchat is that kids can go there and their mom isn't there. Mom is on Facebook, right?
Yeah.
And people who are in between moms and kids are on Instagram as their primary medium, and then Snapchat is for young girls mostly. Pinterest is the anti-social social media that's about things more than about people. It's a great medium for swapping ideas, and it's almost entirely women. And LinkedIn is the business social medium. You don't want to post your vacation photos on LinkedIn. People will not be happy if you do that.
Yeah, seriously.
And so you use those accordingly. But what I have generally said to clients is you need to find the social media maybe two, that reach your audience and focus on them, because it's very hard to do all of them well.
Yeah, that's true. Absolutely.
And it's, it sucks the life energy out of you. And particularly if you're an orthodontic practice with, 12 employees, focus on one or two and that's it.
So let's say you want to get into the news. Like what constitutes something that's newsworthy? What kind of advice would you give people?
Yeah, well, what I have said to people who wanted me to disseminate things that weren't newsworthy was, let me ask you this. If this weren't about your business, but were about your neighbor's business, would you read this story in the newspaper? Be honest.
Yeah.
And almost always the answer is no. And I say to them, okay, then that's probably a good indicator that's not news. The news hole has gotten squeezed. There's much less time, whether it's on television or in the newspaper, for news. Radio news has literally disappeared. Nobody gets their news from radio anymore. Now there is a place for information on blog sites that are more niche oriented. And of course, there's a niche publication for everything, whether it's online or not.
Yeah.
Them online. So you might find that what isn't news in the general news media is news in your industry publication or in a parent magazine where orthodontics is, an issue that parents think about and care about.
No doubt.
The daily newspaper or a TV newscast, and maybe it isn't sufficiently new and innovative to make your industry publication. It's just new in your area or important to parents. So maybe it works for a blogger who's talking to moms. There's lots of those. So there are ways to find audiences. And then the other thing you need to do, and this really does require an expert, is package your news, frame your story in a way that makes it interesting to a journalist. What's
Mhm.
to a journalist? It's news, it's interesting to their audience, whoever their audience is. And I used to talk to my coworkers when I ran the communication department at United Way. They'd want me to send out a news release on blah, blah, blah. And I'd say to them, that's really not newsworthy. And we don't want to train journalists that we're going to send them junk. And they'd say, yeah, but it's really important. They should cover this. What we're doing is really important. And I'd say to them, that's not the business they're in. They're in the business of disseminating information that their audience wants to know. And it doesn't matter whether you want to know it. It's a matter of whether their audience wants to know it. And like anything else, what does your customer want and need? If your customer, that is the journalist, doesn't want or need that, it doesn't matter how important it is or how much you care about it. It matters whether they do. So when I talk to journalists, and by the way, I do a lot of writing with a journalism hat on. Most of my writing is feature stories, but still I do a lot of writing for journalism. And what I always say when I talk to journalists is, I've got a story I thought you'd be interested in, or I thought your audience would be interested in, one or the other. And that tells them I'm thinking of them. It's about them. It's not about me. It's not whether I want this in the news. It's
Yeah.
whether they would consider it news. And that tells them I'm on their side. And I think
So do you think the angle which you're kind of coming from when you mention it makes a big difference on whether it might get published?
I have credibility with journalists because they know that I know what news is.
Yeah.
And that doesn't, news shifts depending on how much news is happening at that moment. And,
That's true.
I once had a news event that was definitely something the TV stations were going to cover. And on that day, the governor of our state, I lived in the state capital, unveiled his budget.
Yeah.
There was our story. And we actually canceled the event and said, well, just do it next week. And we did it next week and we got coverage.
That makes sense. That's smart.
Yeah. And a little tip here, the 2 weeks before Christmas and then between Christmas and New Year's particularly, the news media are sucking wind. They're dying for news. Normally, they have a much lower readership and viewership. But once we're all home, our habits aren't changing any. And so this is a great 2 weeks to get coverage. The bar will be a little lower. When I was at United Way, I would set up in advance stories that we were going to pitch the news media during those 2 weeks. And we had much better success because we knew the bar was lower. The hard part is you have to get the people to be available. If it's a story that you want to be involved in, you can't have your primary subject of the story on Christmas vacation.
Of course, which would generally be exactly what would happen. Yeah.
Carolina, that doesn't work.
Do you think that the trust between a journalist and media is really important in getting something published?
This is what I say to clients and students. Astonishingly, journalists are just like real people.
Yeah.
Them just like real people, you are likely to do better. If you talk to journalists like with respect and like you understand what they need, you will do better than if you demand that they cover your story and take umbrage if they don't. Reporters and editors and bloggers they don't have anything against you, or they don't run stories because they like you. They run stories because they're valuable to their audiences. That's the business they're in. I used to have a mug that said, I hope I can say this, keep your boss's boss, my goal, keep my boss's boss off my boss's ass.
Yeah.
Right? So serve your customer's customer. And if
Yep.
you do that, you'll always be successful. So when you're dealing with news media, your customer's customer is their audience. And make sure when you think about your story, is this something that somebody watching TV news would want to hear? And if the answer is yes, then pitch it. And if it's no, try to find a different way to frame it, or try to find something else, or just move on. And then also, of course, distinguish among your various media. I do a lot of work with a business newspaper here in Charleston. They
Yeah.
need stories that are trend stories because they come out weekly. If you say, hey, we have something happening tomorrow, they'll say to you, well, the daily newspaper is going to cover that and we'll be a week late. So we're not going to cover that. But if you say, hey, there's this trend happening in orthodontics, and we have a little element of that kind of opens the door to that larger story, the business paper that comes out weekly will be much more amenable to that. So that
Yeah.
might be a story for the daily newspaper, and it might not work at all for television, which does much better with events than with issues because they need video. But that would be a great story, for example, to a weekly business paper. So the different media require different kinds of news. And it's great it shows reporters respect when you understand their medium and their outlet, and you pitch them things that are relevant to them.
All right. So if a practice has an idea, they want to pitch it to the media, like what do they do? Walk in, email, call? What would your suggestion be?
Well, sadly, in today's, we all experience this. Everybody's got their own favorite way of communicating.
Yeah.
Everybody's got a way of communicating that they won't do. So I know an editor who will not respond to email. His email inbox, he's showed it to me. It's got thousands of unopened emails.
Whoa.
Call him on the phone, you'll almost always get a response. He just appreciates people talking to him. And so that's how you communicate with him. I know reporters who love to get stories over Twitter. Twitter's a great way because you can @ them and you say, hey, I got a story I think you're interested in. A lot of reporters go on Twitter and will say, hey, I'm looking for this information. Has anybody got it? I do that with my Facebook friends when I'm looking for subjects of stories who are just ordinary people. I write for a mom's publication, and I'll post, hey, any of you moms out there, go on vacation in the last year and want to talk or renovate your home, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So there is no one way that works best. What I generally, if I don't know a reporter and I can't find out how they like to communicate, like I'll go on Twitter and see if they're there and whether they communicate that way, or on Facebook or Instagram. But what I'll do is email them and mention, hey, I'll give you a call too, and call them. And if I don't get them, I will hang up and then text them and then go on social media and see if they use that. And that way I've covered 3 bases.
Yeah.
And I try to be respectful and say, hey, I left you an email message, just following up on that in case that's not the way you like to communicate. That way they don't think you're just inundating them because you're a jerk.
Yeah. It's kind of a good mix of both. You're being aggressive, but not overly aggressive.
Yeah. Again, just be a human being, give people time. You're not the only thing on their agenda. And if they don't respond to you, it's probably not because they don't like you, or because
Yeah, probably not. Yeah. Hopefully that's not the reason.
well, in my case, it often is, but but more likely they're just really, really, really busy, and they've got a million other people who want their attention, And so it's good to persevere. Reporters appreciate that. They just persevere nicely. As long as you do that, they'll allow you to persevere sort of indefinitely, particularly if you understand what they want. If you have a practice in St. Louis and you want national coverage and you send information to the local newspaper in Tallahassee, they will think to themselves, what is this person doing? They don't understand what we do. We cover Tallahassee, not
Yeah.
St. Louis, right? So they will never respond to you. But if you're local, if you are in the St. Louis market and you say, hey, here's information about St. Louis, and it's the kind of thing they might be interested in, uh, they are ignoring you because they haven't gotten to you yet, and you just need to persevere.
Gotcha.
Just
So as an ortho practice, do you think there's any best use of PR that they should focus on?
Well, the best use of public relations, no matter what your business is as a complement, as part of the larger marketing function, and to integrate it with everything else, and all systems go. You need to be doing everything uh, um, in a. I know this sounds contradictory. In a focused way.
Yeah,
Find
everything in a focused way. Yeah.
I mean, look, you can do perfectly well without ever advertising. Starbucks, I don't know if they spend a penny on advertising.
Yeah, right.
Stores are their advertising, and you can do a great job without doing a lot of social media. There are certainly businesses that for whom that's really not the way they get business. I suspect that's not the way you want to do it with an orthodontic practice, because you can really home in on your audience through advertising on social media. But certainly finding the places that work best for you. There are plenty of businesses that don't get any stories written about them in the media and do great. But you have to be doing great in the other areas then. But by and large, you want to do some of everything because everything complements everything else.
Gotcha. So if you're writing a press release, do you have any kind of guidelines you think someone should follow, especially if they're new at it?
Sure. There are plenty of templates out there that will help you in the inverted pyramid with the most important information at the top and the least at the bottom. You want to have a boilerplate at the bottom that just summarizes what your organization is about, so that if the person getting your news release thinks, wait, who are you? What do you do? There it is at the bottom. Uh,
Yeah, that makes sense.
you want who, what, when, where, why, high up in the news release. The following will happen on this date and this time, blah, 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 why it's okay, that needs to be high up. And the one thing, and that's a perfectly adequate news release. The one thing I teach my students is how to write great news releases. And great news releases differ from what I just described in that they frame the story. They tell you why this is not just what's happening, but why it's something you cannot miss covering. You want to
Mm.
make this compelling and inspiring. And it is very unlikely that you, Dr. Orthodontist, or your PR, your intern who's going to write your news release, or even possibly your PR person who is a year out of school, knows
Yeah.
how to frame a news release unless they took my course in a way that
Yeah.
inspires people to cover your story, because it's another level up. So if you can do that, you're really ahead of the game, because your news release will stand out among all the millions of news releases that journalists get.
So is there anything you should absolutely not include in the release?
Um, hmm. Anything that's not relevant, just get
That's
to the point.
fair.
Tell it tell your story in the most succinct way, get the most important information up top. In fact, I write news releases sometimes and even put a box in the news release with the what, when, where, how, why, like a media alert right inside the news release. That
Oh, that's cool.
reporter, who's got the attention span of a gnat, doesn't want to read the whole news release. They just want to know whether they're going to put the story on their schedule. They can look at that and know right away. But then when they read the news release, they might go, oh, yeah, okay. We need to when you put it in context like that, when you tell us why this is important, wow, that's different. let me give you an example. Just I'm making this up, but
Yeah.
let's say there's a study out there that shows that poor dental health leads to heart issues, right? I think that's been out there.
Mm-hmm.
You might say in a news release about some new innovation in orthodontics, um, knowing that um, there's X% problem when with people who don't uh, you know, take care of their teeth the right way. In other words, knowing that you're putting your heart health in jeopardy if you don't take care of your teeth. We've just unveiled this new thing that makes it easier for people to take care of their teeth with less effort. You see, you've put this into a larger context that makes this a story that's much more than easier to take care of your teeth and says, whoa, this is about taking care of your whole body health. See what I mean?
That's a good example.
Framing your news release in a way that makes it a more compelling story.
All right. So how would you say we should measure how effective PR is if we're embarking on it?
Well, then you have to think of, right, that's a good question. And you have to think about what can this do? It's a SMART goal. It's relevant and related,
Yeah.
measurable, right? So what
Yeah.
can PR do? Well, if you're doing media relations, you can say, we want 5 media outlets to cover this story. And then that's pretty easy to measure. Did they? Yes or no. 4 did, well, you reached 80% of your goal. And if 12 did, then you blew it out of the water. And then we want to increase web traffic or unique visitors, or the number of visits to X page on our website.
Yeah. Yeah.
We want increased engagement on our Facebook page of X amount. They're fairly easy metrics to create. They just have to be reasonable and relevant to what you're doing, and something that you can connect directly to your PR campaign. If you say we want to increase by 10% our business, the PR campaign is one small element of a larger effort. It's
Mm-hmm.
to draw a line directly from one to the other. I would argue that would not be a reasonable metric for a PR campaign. It might be a reasonable metric for the larger marketing campaign.
Yeah.
That's a metric that we, working together, would come up with, but not for the PR element of that specifically.
Yeah. It's good advice. That integration again is very important.
Very important.
So if someone does run your story, do you send them a thank you note? What is the protocol if
I
someone
never
did
like
this?
giving thank you notes because it suggests that I did this as a favor to you.
Yeah.
But media relations is a trade, right? It's a business proposition. I will give you a story if you put me in your paper. I will give you something your customers want. If you give me something my customers want, my customers being my boss who wants
Yeah.
in the paper. And that is a mutually beneficial arrangement. So I have never written thank you notes, but uh, I make sure the way I thank reporters is to work with them in the most beneficial way to them. I make sure they get everything they need. One of my tenets as a PR guy is to make all the connections and then get out of the way. Reporters do not want the PR guy hanging over them.
Yeah.
So I've always been of the opinion that if you need anything, reach out to me, I'll help you. And I might even send background information. But if I've arranged an interview between the orthodontist and the reporter, I'll let them decide on the time and place and stay out of that. So I'm not a useless third party. And then I just make it easy for them. So for example, when I was at United Way, Richie, I would call reporters and say, listen, if you need anything with that, give me a call. I'll connect you with other people. We're the hub of the nonprofit community in our region. So I know all the nonprofits who do whatever it is you want. So if you need
Yeah.
something, it probably has nothing to do with me, but I'll connect you with the people and I'll cut through some of the red tape and get you right to the person you need.
That makes a lot of sense. You're becoming a resource and know that you're going to help them out.
So there were reporters who knew, just call Barry. and he'll get us where we need to go. And I would say 80% of the time, United Way had nothing to do with the story. And that was fine. And every once in a while, I'd say, well, as a matter of fact, we do that.
Yeah.
We have an expert on that or whatever. And reporters were perfectly happy with that because, again, it was mutually beneficial. And I would connect them with an expert. I was not blowing smoke about this. They knew that when I hooked them up with one of our experts, they were in fact an expert on that. I wasn't going to lead them down a primrose path and not deliver because, again, this is a personal relationship you have with the reporter. And I can tell you, this is kind of funny, because of the work I do, I work with people who, I actually have a friend who does the same thing I do. And she
Yeah.
will sometimes be, she's the journalist and I'm the PR guy. And sometimes I'm the journalist and she's the PR person.
Oh, that's fun.
But we both know what it means to be on either side of the
Yeah.
equation. And we know that we're going to get treated fairly by the other person.
It seems like just recently, maybe not so recently, that society really weighs media opinion very heavily. So maybe you're not going to an outside expert. I mean, do you think that's good or bad? What are your feelings about how that's changed PR?
Well, yes. So I think what you're talking about is news that is really opinion and not news.
Yeah.
Lots of I can tell you that teaching college students, these are communication students. When I started 15 years ago, the students knew what news was, and they had some interaction with the news, but they didn't read the newspaper regularly. And then that became, they mostly didn't read the newspaper at all, but they had some form of news interaction. And then it became, not only didn't they read the newspaper, but they really didn't know like how news was made, or they didn't have much interest in news, period. And now, honestly, this is not hyperbole, my students who are communication majors, they not only don't consume news, they don't know what news is. They can't distinguish news from opinion, from advertising, from comedy. They are sitting ducks for bad information. And so is most of America at this point. And it's really sad to watch that. And you see it in our national politics as well, that many people can't distinguish fact from opinion and silliness. And so, yes, it is a sad fact of life that opinion, sometimes uninformed opinion, is driving a lot of the information in America, and that makes my heart hurt, and it makes me sad about our country. But you're right, it is a phenomenon that exists. But when you're talking to news media, I mean real news outlets, your local newspaper is a news outlet.
Yeah.
I can't think of one that is not. They are trying to tell the truth best they can to their audience. They are trying to be factual, and they have sources, credible, they hope. They try to make sure credible sources for all their information, and they attribute the information they get to somebody. And so if you deal with media like that, with real news media, you will get treated fairly by and large. Look, they have their biases and they have their shortcomings, but more or less, by and large, you'll get fair treatment. And if you don't, just keep at it, and the balance over time will be more or less fair. The way you deal with media opinion is to, reach out to them as well and try to get your opinion heard. But that, I have to say, is a much more, you are in much more danger of things not going well, because you can get shouted down, or you can be just overwhelmed with untruths.
Yeah.
And you combat that. That's a sticky wicket. Now, I have to say, if you're dealing with your orthodontic practice, I don't know that you're going to get into that realm very often.
Yeah, because you're dealing with local media, so you're kind of arguing it seems to the public a little more credible because it's not influenced so much by this opinion.
Arguing involved. You either have news or you don't of interest to people. And what's the most controversial thing in orthodontics today? The orthodontics teeth straightening by mail.
Yeah, I
Maybe
would say that comes to mind for sure.
that orthodontists have a good argument, and they should just make that argument with real facts. And showing is better than telling. If you've got credible information, show that, and you'll win the argument. Most of the time, not always, not with everyone, but you'll do better than if you don't.
Hmm. So thinking of PR, I think it's really closely related to search engine optimization. And I know every orthodontist I've spoken to, it's like that's one of the obvious things I always at. Do you do SEO? I need someone in SEO. But a lot of people don't understand that they're very closely related. Can we just talk a little bit about that?
And I really should have mentioned SEO. So public relations, the content that we're producing, whether it's a blog or website copy or whatever, this has to be relevant to your audience, and your audience is searching for things that are relevant to them. If you're a mom and you're looking for an orthodontist, you're going to search orthodontist and your hometown, right?
Yeah.
Or child, teeth, braces, the keywords. Well, those words need to be in your copy, and they need to be in your advertising, and they need to be in your uh, your paid SEO. That is paying Google to rise higher in the search.
Yeah. Search engine marketing. Yeah.
Right. Um, all of that works together with the content that you're writing. And the fact is that good writers today know how to write with that information embedded in the writing. So I wouldn't use a lot of synonyms for orthodontist or teeth or braces, because those are the words that people are searching. For example, this is a great example. Um, if you were to use the keywords, if you were a travel website and you use the words inexpensive air travel, what you'd find is that there's a few hundred searches a month for that.
Yeah.
If you wrote cheap flights, you would find that there's like 10 million searches for that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Copy ought to be filled with the word cheap flights. And you should never write inexpensive air travel, even though I would ordinarily probably use that language. But if I want to be found on a search engine, I'd better be using the language that people are searching. The truth is, Richie, I don't know how to, your typical college student probably is better at posting Instagram posts and linking them, tactically working in social media than I am, because they do it every day and I don't. But I am much better at the strategy of using Instagram and integrating it with all the other elements we've been talking about. So you're the marketing person in your orthodontic practice, who also is your receptionist and your scheduler. They might be able to make nice social media posts, and maybe they got good at Canva and they can create some nice imagery, and they make nice posts. But are they being strategic about that? Are they connecting it to your search engine marketing? Do they even know how to do that? Et cetera,
Yeah.
et cetera.
Checking off the boxes. I've made 3 posts this week is not really the smartest way to go about it.
Yeah, and I mean, look, everything's about ROI, right? And maybe if that person is already on the payroll, you can do some minimal marketing with them, and that might be useful to you. But if you have plans that go beyond, keep a steady business, you probably need to step it up. And maybe you don't need to step it up to the point where you have an outside agency working for you all the time. I mean, there's gradations, and I don't.
Of course. Yeah.
And maybe one step at a time, you do one thing. But like anything else, you get what you pay for. And just like you can straighten your teeth by mail, and 80% of the time you'll get 90% of the benefit. But
Yeah.
if you want to be sure it's done right, and you want to make sure that you don't have complicating factors before you start with the teeth straightening, and all the other things, you need to engage an orthodontist and have the orthodontist say, well, if we just straighten your teeth, you're going to have this other problem, and maybe you shouldn't do that.
Hmm.
Right?
Yeah. Um, Speaking of influencer marketing, just gonna pivot a little bit. Do you think that's PR? What do you feel about what's the relationship there between the two?
First of all, the discussion about what's public relations and what's marketing, I don't take off my PR hat and then put on my marketing hat.
Yeah.
I don't really care what's what. If you've got the skill, do it, and if you don't, find someone who does. And think about it in your practice. Your graphic designer is very strong at strategy. He knows that from top to bottom, and he's, if not driving the bus, he's certainly sitting in the front passenger seat talking to the driver, right? Mm-hmm. So it doesn't really matter I don't think the nomenclature matters very much. But influencers are important now. People follow influencers, and if an influencer says, I use this product, we know for a fact that works. So working with influencers, you'd be shocked at how much it costs, even for influencers you never heard of. They're 19 years old. And
yeah.
you can't believe, you've looked at their YouTube channel and you can't believe anybody would watch this, but they do. And so, they really have value.
Yeah, they've got the eyeballs. That's what it matters a lot of times.
Way of the world.
Right eyeballs. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
All right. So I know you've done a lot of crisis management for people. You have any advice for a doctor to, how much should they prepare for potential crisis?
Number one, don't have a crisis.
Yeah, that's true.
But Richie, I would say that 80% of the crisis communications out there involves a crisis that was avoidable. Think about these crises. You are mayor of a city that is roughly at sea level. You are on a body of water in the path of hurricanes.
Yeah.
That can protect you against a hurricane up to about level 3, right? But occasionally, every 50 years or so, a hurricane category 4 hurricane or 5 hurricane hits. What would you say if I told you that city got hit by a category 4 hurricane and it flooded the city? That's not a crisis. That was an inevitability.
Yeah.
Right? New Orleans a lot of people in New Orleans failed because they knew the levees weren't going to hold and they were going to be in crisis. And somebody should have said, I'm betting somebody did, hey, this has a PR impact, but it's much bigger than that. We have to fix the levees, right?
Yeah.
And I could give you 100 examples. I will tell you an example. This happened to me. I was working for an organization, I won't name it, and I won't tell you specifics, but I went into the CEO's office, which I did pretty much every day. We had lots of dialogue, even about, hey, how about that football team, And I closed the door, and his eyes kind of widened because I never did that. And I said to him, today, I'm going to earn my entire year's salary. We are doing this thing. And if we don't stop doing this thing, we will lose half our donations and you'll get fired.
Yeah.
I'm your PR guy telling you there's going to be a terrible PR impact. There will be nothing I can do to protect you once it happens. So we need to stop this immediately. And we stopped doing this because I convinced him of the PR impact.
Nice. Yeah.
That's crisis communication, but on the front end, it's preventative. And I would tell you that most crises result from things that were predictable. And so I would argue, first and foremost, it's a bit facetious, but number one, don't have a crisis. Look at what you do and make sure that you are not cheating people. Make sure you are not committing fraud with your advertising. Make sure that you
seriously
some liability in your practice that maybe it's not fair that people would hold you responsible for this, but they will. Make sure that even though you could make a plausible argument for what you're doing, it's got to be convincing. Otherwise, you'll lose. So that's number one. Number one is make sure that you are not putting yourself in a position where you're going to have a crisis.
That makes sense.
So there's 80% of the crises out there or something like that. And then the other thing, it's very well documented out there. When you have a crisis, you just have to be as real as possible. Acknowledge guilt. If you're guilty, tell people, the message is, I didn't make this up. Tell it all, tell it now. Get it all out, admit all of your wrongdoing immediately. If you can't do that right away, say, as soon as we know what happened or can get all the information together, we will release it all to you as honestly as possible. We're not holding back, but we need to find out what happened here. And then be as honest and transparent as possible. And make sure that you have armed all of your nest, what we call the nest, all of your closest supporters, your staff, your board of directors, if it's an orthodontic practice, all of your customers. Make sure you talk to them as soon as possible and you tell them the truth and arm them, encourage them to interact with anybody they want to tell those truths. Okay, and those truths may hurt and they may be in the short term harmful, but if you are truthful with the public, you will be rewarded. And if you try to hide the truth, you will never succeed. The truth is always the best, and not just the truth, but the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Get it out there and tell everybody.
Well, I mean, would you say that it's the same strategy should be applied if someone on your team does something wrong that could affect your brand? Like say they're caught for embezzling or on a reality show and did something stupid, like what?
Right. Well, look, the public understands. If your CFO was embezzling and they stole everybody's money and they stole your money, customer, and now I'm not sure how this would work in an orthodontic practice, but we have violated your trust in some way, right?
Yeah.
Your money. Tell them, people will understand that the money was stolen from you too, right? Your practice was a victim also. People will understand. And if you say to them, here's what happened, here's what we're doing about it, and we will communicate with you relentlessly about this. Every time we find out something new, we'll let you know and we'll tell you everything. People appreciate that, and you can actually win supporters by being honest and transparent. This happened in real life with the makers of Tylenol. I don't know, this is 30 years ago. There was a scare with Tylenol. Oh boy, I don't remember the details. I think the Tylenol was being poisoned. Somebody was injecting something into it. Anyway, Tylenol was not responsible, but they immediately pulled all of their product off the shelves. They announced it immediately. They told the public what they were going to do to prevent this in the future. And they were so totally transparent. Yes, they lost a lot of business in the next, weeks or maybe even month or two, but they came back. They made up all that business immediately. People had total trust in Tylenol and their brand was strengthened, even though they lost business in the very short term. So that is a great lesson for everybody. Just be honest.
Yeah.
And
it seems so simple when you say it. It's hard when it's happening, I suppose.
There is an art, Richie, to how you communicate this.
Yeah.
Telling the whole truth doesn't mean bearing your soul necessarily. It doesn't mean you have to tell people everything just everything that they need to know, everything they care about. And a good PR person can, a good crisis communication person can help you craft messaging that is authentic and real and honest, and also, positions you in the best way possible.
Yeah, that's nice. So what would you say to a doctor that's kind of really modest, shy, but they're actually doing a lot of really great things that are newsworthy? Yeah. So it's not getting out there. Do you have some advice to them, to their team, to kind of get over?
So modest or shy or introverted, that doesn't really matter. If you have somebody who just hates, and I say it doesn't matter, meaning anybody, you can be shy or introverted or modest and be willing to be interviewed and talk about, what you're doing. That doesn't,
Yeah.
you don't have to be boastful to do it. You just communicate what's important out there. Now, I guess there are probably practitioners who are not comfortable in interview settings, or who don't feel they don't really know how to do an interview. And there are people who train people for interviews, and I've done that. And it's fairly easy, and you can become much more comfortable much more quickly. I once taught a public speaking course in college, and a student first day of class said, "You can just give me my F now. I can't do it." And
Oh, wow.
I said to her, "Challenge accepted. You are going to be comfortable at the end of this class." And in fact, at the end, she was, because I taught her what the magic formula was and gave her a few simple tools, and she realized she could do it. It's not that hard. So you can learn how to do that, or you can just find another spokesperson inside the office. You don't need to be an orthodontist to speak about orthodontics, because when you're speaking to the general public, you don't want to talk about bicuspids. You want to talk about teeth, and your back teeth or your front teeth, and so they don't really need to have the deep scientific background. They just need to know generally what they're talking about, and there's probably other people in the office who can do that. In fact, I'm almost certain there would be. So if
Yeah.
you somebody in your practice who is comfortable doing that and is willing to talk to the public at large, whether it's through television or whatever else, do it that way. But I don't think that being shy is really relevant. Um, I'm sure you've interviewed people on this video chat who were introverted or even shy. And
Yeah, I think you meet a lot of people that you would have never thought were introverted and actually end up being very well spoken. Yeah.
yeah, the real definition of introversion, and we've gone way off course here, is people who like to think before they speak. And extroverts are people who think out loud.
Yeah, for sure.
Actually, introverts, if they're prepared in advance, they often make the best interview subjects because they never ramble.
Hmm. That's a good point. Absolutely. And I've seen both in meetings for sure.
Oh, yeah, right.
So is there a particular set of skills you think someone in a doctor's office should have that want to try to do some PR themselves?
Well, you go back to the beginning again, know your audience, be able to connect with your audience and understand what they want,
Yeah.
with how they live their lives, and make sure that you are feeding that. If you can take your ego out of it and understand it's not about you, but about them, talk about what's of interest to your audience. If you can do that, you're 40% of the way there right off the bat. And by the way, you're ahead of 40% of the people in the business who don't understand that. So right there, you have a leg up. And, it's good to have a good writer. I can tell you as a journalist that when I get a news release or some other communication from somebody who doesn't know the rules of grammar and says something is comprised of something else, which is the misuse of the word comprised, by the way, and
Yeah.
rules of the language, they lose credibility in my eye. I think this person doesn't know what they're doing. Now, if that comes directly from an orthodontist, I probably don't care, because that's not their business. But if it's coming from someone who claims to be in public relations, yeah, I think to myself, oh, I'm going to have to do all the heavy lifting because they don't know what they're doing. I don't have time for that.
That makes sense. So is there anything that they should do to kind of up their game if they feel like maybe they might be in that situation? Or
Well,
should they just go straight to outsourcing it?
somebody who's an expert in that. I mean, and the second best thing to do is just, there's a million resources online. Go look them up, and just kind of teach yourself some of the basics. There's plenty of stuff out there. As I said, I can teach you how to write a great news release, but you can write a perfectly adequate news release. And again, it's the 80-20 rule. You'll get 80% of the coverage you would have gotten with me. And that's for zero cost. That's probably pretty good in many cases.
Yeah. But doctors don't have a lot of time, so I wouldn't suggest they put a lot of their mental energy into these things personally. But
There's a cost to everything. And And yeah, you want to be real about those costs, because it's not just money, it's time and energy. And then you'd be surprised how all of a sudden you are racking up costs the more you do this, because now you need a content management system, and now you need a public relations management system, and now suddenly you're spending $100 a month for that and $200 a month for that, and you would have been better off hiring an expert who's amortized all those costs over 35 clients.
Oh yeah, if some people saw my monthly software bill, they would probably not believe it.
And they're all paying just a little piece of that, and in many cases better. But look, this is not a business pitch. An orthodontic practice can do some of the work that professionals can do for them on their own. If they have somebody with a little skill and some time, they can do the basics. If they want to go to the next level, then you need to hire somebody a little more sophisticated, and then at some point you need to hire a firm that has different kinds of experts who can help you with everything.
Gotcha. Is there anything else you want to cover before we wrap it up?
I mean, you asked me about my business. I got the free plug in there.
Yeah.
How much? What more can I ask for? Go big, fly.
Awesome. All right, Barry. Well, thanks for being on the show. I always learn a lot when I speak to you. Knowing an expert's great. I love that.
Really enjoyed it.
All right, well, take it easy. If you've been wondering what PR is or how you can use it to help grow your practice, I think Barry did a really good job of explaining it. He's a college professor, so he could explain it at a very high level, and he did a good job of showing how you can integrate it into your existing marketing strategy. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, or you have a suggestion for a future episode, just reach out to us at orthothrive.com. If you want to contact me directly, just email me at richard@orthosalesengine.com. Keep grinding, keep thriving, and we'll see you next time.